In one quiet area of Ibadan city, nestled at the edge of Olokia, there was a pepper soup joint that everyone swore had the best tasting dishes in the area. It was run by Momati. Momati's place was always packed with hungry customers. It wasn't just a meal they were after, but an experience, something that seemed to satisfy their souls more than their stomachs. The faded sign, Momati's Pot, stood like a forgotten relic, yet no one could ever ignore the allure of its aroma wafting through the streets, especially at night when the air was cool and the city seemed to slow down for a while. Momati, the unassuming middle-aged woman who ran the joint, was well loved by her patrons. With her warm smile and soft-spoken manner, she could disarm anyone with just a few words. Clad in a simple, yet immaculate blue wrapper and a white blouse, Momati's presence seemed ordinary, but those who truly tasted her pepper soup knew better. It was no ordinary dish. People would line up for hours, their stomachs rumbling, their patience tested. But once they received their bowls of steaming pepper soup, laden with fish, meat, and spices, all their doubts vanished. Each bite seemed to bring a warmth that spread from their bellies to their hearts. No one knew how or why, but they all agreed that Momati's soup was something special, something that transcended the ordinary. Little did they know, the secret behind the soup was something far more sinister. Momati's ingredients were not what they seemed. She never revealed her secrets, claiming they came from her late grandmother's recipe, passed down through generations. But in truth, it wasn't just spices that made her dishes so irresistible. It was the power of a dark, small egg. Every week, without fail, Momati would travel to a secluded forest on the outskirts of Ibadan. The air would be thick with the scent of damp earth and moss as she ventured deeper into the forest. There, in the shadow of towering trees, she would perform a strange and mysterious ritual. Under the cover of night, she would summon shadowy, otherworldly figures, spirits who granted her the power to transform into a snake. With this transformation, she would spit out the dark egg that would become the heart of her secret recipe. It was during this time that Momati's true nature was revealed to the spirits. In her serpent form, she was vulnerable, yet powerful, wielding a strange magic that only the spirits could provide. As the dark egg formed from her mouth, she would swallow it once more and return to her human form, ready to prepare her pepper soup the next day. But this was a secret that no human could ever see. It was a dangerous ritual, one that bound her to the spirits and kept the secret of her success locked away from the world. Momati's pepper soup joint had become the talk of the town, and the line outside her shop grew longer every day. People traveled from all corners of the city just to taste her famous soup. Yet, there was something strange happening, something that no one could quite understand. David, a young man who had recently relocated to the area, had heard the rumors of Momati's incredible dishes. Eager to try it for himself, he brought his dog along one evening. The streets were filled with the usual bustle, and the air smelled faintly of grilled meat and spices. As David walked towards Momati's shop, his dog, a large and protective breed, began to bark uncontrollably. The dog's eyes were wide, and its body was tense, as if it were trying to warn David away from the place. David, however, assumed the dog was just reacting to the large crowd that had gathered outside. "Come on, boy," he said, tugging on the leash. "It's just a lot of people. You're being silly." But the dog refused to move, its barks growing more desperate. It stood firmly in place, not budging an inch. Ignoring his dog's protest, David pushed forward and entered the shop. As he walked in, the usual clamor of the busy joint filled his ears, people talking, eating, and laughing. He ordered a bowl of pepper soup and found a seat. The soup was as delicious as everyone said it was. The warmth and depth of the flavors lingered on his tongue. But as David sat there, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in his stomach, much like the feeling that was growing in the dog outside. Over the next few days, David noticed something even more bizarre. Each time he passed by Momati's shop with his dog, the animal would start barking uncontrollably when they reached the door. It was as if the dog was trying to tell him something, a message that David couldn't decipher. The strange barking caught the attention of other people as well, but most just assumed the dog was hungry or wanted a taste of the pepper soup. However, whispers began to circulate among the locals. Some began to suspect that Momati was hiding something. "Why does the dog bark like that every time it passes by her shop?" one woman murmured to her friend. "I don't trust it. There's something wrong with that place." Others dismissed the gossip, brushing it off as superstition. But those who had been frequenting Mama T's joint for a long time began to question the source of the food's inexplicable allure. What if there's something dark behind all this? Another mom pondered. What if this isn't just a recipe passed down from her grandmother? Despite these whispers, Mama T's business continued to thrive. She served every customer who came through her door, no matter how long the line was. Her workers, though puzzled by her strange request, never to help with the preparation of the soup, accepted her rules. They would sweep the floors, serve the customers, but never dared to interfere with her secretive cooking methods. "Do you want to kill me?" Mama T would shout if anyone even tried to offer assistance with the ingredients. Her workers would pause, confused, but ultimately they would return to their duties. They trusted Mama T. She had always been kind to them, and they never suspected that the woman who fed them and others with such care had a dark secret. One night, as the moon hung low in the sky, David found himself walking near Mama T's shop once again. His dog had been barking frantically at the door for days now, and tonight, something felt different. The air was thick with anticipation, and David couldn't help but feel that something was about to be revealed. Curious, he followed the barking dog outside the shop. The street was eerily quiet, the only sound being the dog's frantic barks. David looked around and saw other dogs gathered near the shop as well, all barking at the same spot. His curiosity grew. Was something wrong? What could they be sensing? He hurried to the door of the shop, and as he tried to open it, he noticed something was off. The door was locked. David's heart pounded as he knocked, trying to alert any of the workers inside. The barking outside intensified, as though the dogs were trying to tell him something. Panicking, David forced the door open, and saw a big snake. He called for the neighbors to help him. They gathered around, and what they saw inside shocked them to their core. There, in the center of the room, was a giant, black snake, its body coiled in a way that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. The snake was writhing and twisting, but it was the sound that caught everyone's attention. It was Mama T's voice coming from the creature's mouth. "Please help me. Please help me," the voice cried out in desperation. The neighbors recoiled, some screaming in horror, others running for cover. But some gathered their courage, demanding that Mama T return to her human form. But she couldn't. She was trapped in the body of the snake, unable to turn back into a human. Her secret had been exposed. As the neighbors gathered around, some began to shout in disbelief. "So this is what you've been selling? This is what you've been feeding us?" they cried. The air was thick with fear and confusion. They had eaten from the very dish that had been created by dark forces, and now the truth was out. Mama T, in her snake form, let out a final, mournful cry before she vanished into the shadows. The ritual had been broken, and with it, her power. She would never be able to turn back into a human again. As the crowd stood in stunned silence, the sounds of barking dogs faded into the distance, and Mama T's secret was left behind in the darkness. The night air seemed to freeze around them as the realization of what had just occurred settled in. The people gathered at the door of Mama T's pepper soup joint, their faces filled with disbelief and horror. The dogs had gone quiet now, but the tense atmosphere remained. David's heart still pounded in his chest, and his hand trembled as he reached for his phone to call for help. But he couldn't move. He was rooted to the spot, his mind racing. What just happened?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. He glanced at the few brave souls who had stayed behind, their faces pale, eyes wide, still processing the strange and terrifying scene they had witnessed. The figure of the snake that had once been Mama T slithered into the shadows, leaving behind an oppressive silence in the room. David couldn't shake the feeling that something even darker had been set in motion. One of the elderly women, who had been a loyal customer of Mama T for years, stepped forward. Her wrinkled face was a mixture of fear and sadness, as though she too felt a sense of betrayal. "I knew there was something not right about that place," she muttered, her voice shaking. She clasped her hands together as if in prayer. "But I never imagined this." The others nodded in agreement, their voices murmuring. Some of them were angry, their eyes filled with a burning need for answers. Others were in shock, too stunned to speak. She's been feeding us this cursed soup, hasn't she? A tall man shouted, his hands clenched into fists. His face was red, veins bulging in his neck as he stepped forward. For years, we've been eating her damn soup, and now we are finding out it's been made by dark magic. David stepped back, overwhelmed by the chaotic flood of emotions around him. But she didn't seem evil. She was always so kind, so caring to everyone, he muttered. The more he thought about it, the harder it was to reconcile the Momati he knew with the sinister truth that had just been revealed. The woman who had spoken earlier, a middle-aged shopkeeper who had been a frequent customer, shook her head sadly. Kindness doesn't always mean purity. Sometimes, it's just a mask. She's been using us for something. The crowd, still in shock, was slowly coming to terms with the gravity of the situation. As the moments passed, the eerie silence was broken by the sound of distant sirens approaching, but the presence of the police could not erase the strange, unsettling energy that had enveloped the area. David, however, was consumed by an overwhelming need to understand. Why, he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. Why would she do this? One of the older men, who had been silent until now, took a deep breath and spoke slowly, his voice carrying the weight of his years. The secret to her power isn't in the soup itself, he said. It's in the ritual she performed. She made a pact with spirits, dark ones. They granted her power, and in return, she offered them something in her food. She tricked us, all of us, into consuming it. We were her offerings, without even knowing it. The crowd went silent again as the man's words settled over them. The idea that Momati had been using dark forces to manipulate her customers felt surreal. But as the events of the night played out in their minds, it made a twisted kind of sense. How else could she have created such a powerful, irresistible dish? David's mind raced. He thought back to his first time in Momati's shop, the way he had felt as he tasted the pepper soup, the warmth that had spread through his body. It hadn't been just hunger being satisfied. It had felt like a connection, something deeper, something that couldn't be explained by ordinary means. Now, it made sense. The comfort he had felt wasn't just from the spices or the ingredients, it had come from something far more sinister. Something that had taken root in his soul. As the police arrived, the crowd parted to let them through, but no one knew what to say. How could they explain what had just happened? How could they tell the authorities about the dark ritual and the transformation they had witnessed? David, his mind reeling, walked into the shop. The inside was still filled with the remnants of the dinner crowd, empty bowls, spilled drinks, the faint scent of pepper soup lingering in the air. He looked at the counter where Momati usually stood, and for the first time, he noticed the worn-out wooden surface that seemed aged beyond its years. The place felt abandoned, empty, though the warmth of the soup still hung in the air. His eyes scanned the shelves, looking for any clues. And there, near the back, tucked into a corner, he saw it, an old, weathered book. It was bound in leather, and the pages were yellowed with age. He recognized it immediately as a grimoire. A spellbook. David's breath caught in his throat as he carefully reached for the book. Opening it, he scanned the pages, his eyes falling on the symbols and words written in a language he could barely understand. The text described rituals, incantations, and the use of dark powers to control others. It was clear that Momati had been using this book to bind the spirits to her will, gaining her strength at the cost of her humanity. The realization hit David hard. She's not just a cook, he muttered. She's a witch who's been using us all as pawns. As he flipped through the pages, he found a particularly dark section, one that described the ritual he had witnessed. The dark egg, the transformation into a snake, the pact with the spirits, the recipe for the soup. Everything was laid out in horrifying detail. And then, at the very bottom, there was a chilling note: the price will be paid in full when the last of our customers is fed. David's stomach churned as he closed the book, his hands shaking. It was then that he realized the ritual was still ongoing. Momati's power was still feeding on them even as she had disappeared into the night. They were all still bound by the dark forces she had summoned. The price of her magic was far from paid. Please subscribe, like and share. Thanks for watching.